Ghosts and Goblins is a game I never really got into back in the day, but back then I used to care what people thought of my gaming ability, so it was a game I tried to get into. It was some kind of badge of honor among people who thought they were really cool for beating a kid's game from the 80s. This is what we had before everyone moved on to exclusively bragging about FromSoft games. I don't mind old school hard, but my limit is more in the Castlevania Mega Man level than the real tough games. And even then, I don't value hard for its own sake. I actually have fun having fun, believe it or not. I'd rather play the easier Japanese Castlevania 3 than the localized one, or I'd rather play the considerably easier Mega Man 6 than any of the other NES games, because I like to have fun, and flying is fun. Keep that in mind for later. The only thing I like more than having fun is playing underpowered handheld systems, and it turned out they made quite a few fun games on such a system, one of which is a nice amalgamation of already existing 8-bit classics, and it started its own short-lived series. Gargoyle's Quest is a spin-off of Ghosts and Goblins. I didn't just open up with that for no reason. We play as one of the annoying gargoyle things, which is cathartic, after being killed by them repeatedly in Ghosts and Goblins. Knowledge of the Ghosts and Goblins series is not really needed to play this game, which is good because I do not want to assign homework before I tell you to play this game. This game opens up to a text scroll that you can read, or you can ignore it if you're cool, and we then get to walk around a top-down room as Firebrand, a red gargoyle who looks like the red gargoyles in the previous game, and is compared to in-game to another gargoyle called Red Blaze. But if you look at the Western box art, he's actually green and has a big smile. Regardless of his actual canonical colour, Firebrand is a beast to play as, at least during the action stages. During exploration, he's basically the most vanilla thing imaginable. The easiest way to explain how this game plays is to say, well, it's like Zelda 2, and then you have to say, but, and then add a quantifier. For example, this game is like Zelda 2, but the towns are also top-down. Or, this is like Zelda 2, but we can hover all the time. And this works for me because I like Zelda 2's ideas, but it's another game that I was never a huge fan of. Trust me, I wanted to be. For years it was unfairly hated by people who weren't the generation that grew up with it, and I wanted to be the cool young person with a different opinion. Now I accidentally do that on a regular basis, except I'm not young or cool. The action stages here are surprisingly fun point A to B platform stages with a lot of enemies. Nothing too surprising in concept, but it's the execution that made this one of my favourite experiences on this brick. The stages have a lot of verticality, and our red boy is always centered across both axes, which means we can never be flanked by something we couldn't have seen above us or to the side. And this is emphasized by the fact that the sprites are small enough that we don't have to dedicate too much screen real estate to them. Instead, we have the environment and the obstacles get the spotlight they need. Since this isn't about precise pixel platforming or speeding on past, it being centered all the time on both axes isn't actually an intrusion like it may be in other games that are a bit more typical. We don't need to focus on the ground here, as it's not really of importance. Instead, what matters is the circumference around our little red boy. What we have to worry about is just being floaty and dealing with enemies who can come from anywhere. We're equipped with the ability to hover right from the beginning of the game, but initially it barely does anything. It's basically there to travel slightly longer distances in the air, or to correct a mishandled jump. At best, we can get a couple of aerial attacks in at once with this, but it's basically there just to help save you. However, the hover ability is upgraded over the course of the game, and by the end we can use it indefinitely. It becomes the game's identity after enough time. Upgrades to our flying are a great way to reward the player, and it allows the level design to be adjusted over this adventure. And even when we're not at that final upgrade that lets us fly indefinitely, the game will still have you rely on this for all the aerial combat, which will never get old. Aerial movement is even better with the great jump we have at our disposal, which can be a small hop or much bigger dependent on how long you press the button. We have free control of our jump here, which was not always a given in 8-bit games. Our movement options are even better once you factor in the ability to cling onto walls which not only lets you do wall jumps or attack from higher vantage points indefinitely, but clinging to these walls refills your stamina meter, which allows you to play an extreme version of the floor is made of lava here. This much freedom in our movement doesn't just aid the diverse level design, it turns many boss fights into some of my favourites on this system, and perhaps even 8-bit games in general. Sure, the fights themselves aren't deep, don't expect complicated maneuvers or second phases all the time, but your movement is just so fun and freeing. In addition to the sheer fun of gliding, wall jumping and shooting powerful projectiles, it also means you have no one to blame but yourself when you eventually do lose to these bosses. They're tough but fair. There's none of that, how did the game expect me to avoid that? You can fly here, the entire arena is yours to abuse. Taking advantage of your movement turns what could have been otherwise standard fights into great ones. And on a much lesser scale, this also applies to regular enemy encounters. The platforming levels here are consistently fun throughout thanks to our movement options and the enjoyable level design. The levels themselves aren't afraid of being tall and wide. The sometimes large feeling levels aren't ever broken up either. It's a continuous and seamless level. Though these levels do have a snaking design, so we wrap around areas previously explored to make the levels feel bigger than they are. There's no wasted space here, it's very efficient. Another joy to the levels here is we have no one-hit kills, not even spikes. The worst problems of 8-bit games are completely avoided here. This is all the peaks with no valleys. When we're not doing side-on platforming, this game feels a bit more like a top-down adventure game or an RPG. We have a top-down field of view, which serves as a connecting point between levels, and while it isn't compelling on its own right, it is still well executed. While we walk across this world map, there are random encounters, which put us into a tiny arena with a couple of enemies, which are pretty easy to kill since they have very little defense and you have a projectile. On top of that, not only are these not very compelling, there are very few of them, so you will see the same few varieties over and over. These are the weakest part of the game, no doubt, but they're not that bad, or frequent enough that you dread them. They're just a small obstacle that are kinda forgettable. The point of these encounters, other than to pad this short game, is to give the player more vials, which serve as this game's currency. There's no experience points here, so while this interface and presentation at the times may lead you to think this is an RPG, it really isn't. Combat is meaningless unless you want to buy items, so this is just the precursor to Paper Mario, the Origami King. These top-down sections, while basic, do at least serve as a nice breather between the more extreme sections, and it does help to contextualize everything. This is basically a fancy hub world with NPCs that give you objectives and hints, and most importantly, they can give you passwords since the game has no built-in save system. 1990 Game Boy games really weren't rocking the fancy stuff yet like batteries. And since this game can be beaten in one sitting very comfortably, it's not really a big deal either by any means. The map itself is easy to get through and simple enough that it's pretty hard to get lost in it. Whenever you wander too far away from your current area anyway, an NPC will tell you, in a mocking way, that you're not ready to move on any further, but they still give you the option in case you want to show off how insufficient your gliding ability is. The game signposts itself very well, everything is laid out wonderfully and explained to the player. This isn't the kind of game that relies on walkthroughs for new players, which is once again a nice surprise for the era. On the topic of signposting, the visual direction here is just top notch. We have very clear and readable characters, complete with a lighter coloured outline around them to make sure they don't blend in with these sometimes detailed backgrounds. There's a lot of contrast here for a game that's not permitted to have any colours. The backgrounds themselves, while detailed, are never busy, and the game is happy to have blank backgrounds intermittently to help prevent everything from blurring together. For example, we have stone buildings complete with windows, pillars, and this grotesque looking fleshy veins. But on the other side, we also have brick buildings with their own architecture, skull doors, cracks in the wall, trees in the open expanses there, and spikes that look entirely different than the spikes we saw in the stone building previously. And perhaps my favourite example of this is a little bit after that when the sky becomes darker with clouds taking up the top of the screen. The grass is blowing in the wind and lightning becomes a visual treat just to make this boss fight a more climactic endeavour. And the storm isn't just visual either, it'll push you back if you stand still, since there are obviously strong winds here. The grass isn't the only thing affected. Every area of the game that isn't just a recycled random encounter looks unique. And even the most vanilla areas have some decorations, like trees or distant mountain tiles to make it look a little less empty, even if it ultimately doesn't achieve much in these random encounters. The detail here is commendable for once again a very early Gameboy title. Really the only issue I have with this game's art is the amount of sprite flickering, and it's at its worst during the busier moments. Despite that, the UI is very clearly laid out, and that is good for a game that has so few buttons available. I would say it's a feature of the game that we're not in menus more, considering how things initially appear. In the actual side-scrolling sections, our only menu is a small one that lists our lives and lets us select which attack we want to do, and that's really it. It's simple and to the point. Things get a little more complicated in overhead sections, but not by much. Here we can activate a small command menu with context-sensitive actions such as talk, use, and check. These will let you talk to whoever is in front of Firebrand, or use a particular item on whoever is in front of Firebrand. It's basically just spicy talking. And we also have another option to collect whichever item we're on top of, which is usually just vials. These vials are the world's currency, and are pretty much just used to purchase lives from vendors. Thankfully, we don't need to buy better equipment or anything, so purchasing is largely an optional mechanic here, and it's just in place to give people a better safety net in case they do not want a game over, which itself is not really much of a punishment in a quick game that has passwords, but I won't say no to letting players farm for lives. Vials can be found in levels themselves as a collectible, usually just out of the way so they are a reward for people who want to take up the challenge to reach them. Pretty standard stuff, but I'm the kind of person that goes for star coins or Kong letters, so of course I'll go for these. Another assist is the optional Essence of Soul Stream, which acts as a healing item, but it can only be used once per life per level, so it won't be too abusable, but it does still allow players late game to at least ease up the challenge a bit. This does come in handy because enemies are relentless later in the game, and they do respawn whenever you move back to their spawning point, even if you killed countless others who spawned there before. Enemies are usually simple to deal with, but when they start to become horrors that keep persisting, the player's upgrades begin to feel a bit more essential. In addition to having the option to heal, our total health increases during the course of a game anyway, like our stamina meter, and this is practically required because the Gargoyle we play as in the opening minutes would be no match for the later enemies. And this isn't just speculation, the game puts this into practice during the final boss, who gives us the choice before we attempt to kill him, to work for him or to fight him. And in a twist reminiscent of Dragon Quest I, the obviously bad outcome here is not ideal. Although instead of getting just a bad ending or something, the villain uses this moment to steal our powers, so we have to fight him back at square one. Granted, this is optional and a punishment for picking the obviously wrong option, and after dying we can redo the fight proper with our abilities intact, but this small moment shows us just how much we progressed in ability. Lots of games give us superficial upgrades, things that are just numbers that do more damage or give us better resilience. But here our entire game plan changes because hovering is what the game is built around, to the point that the final boss pretty much is an entirely airborne affair. Gargoyle's Quest isn't just a fun spin-off to a much more popular game, but this is quintessential 8-bit. At times, this is a top-down game with towns straight out of any RPG of the era, and at other times, we have some of the most fun platforming available. The quick runtime means that this is highly replayable, which is a nice bonus in today's world where many of my other options are 80-hour long games that I don't want to commit to. This is an overshadowed classic, and some of the most fun you can have with 4 AA batteries. Oh yeah, and they made some sequels as well.